I'm Allie May. I'm the moderator for this panel. I'm really excited. These were always my favorite panels when I attended LCUE because they just made you leave feeling like, yeah, I can do anything. So let's start this discussion with just a brief introduction of who you are, what you write. So we'll start with Charlie.
Hello, I'm Charlie Pulsipher. I write science fiction and fantasy, mainly young adult. I'm also a cardboard artist. I make tiny, itty bitty, intricate things out of cardboard and paper.
The most beautiful stuff.
Yes, it's so amazing.
His stuff is so cool.
Love it. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I love when people wow over those. So I have about 5 books out, and I'm working on more.
All right, Jared.
Awesome. I'm Jared Quan. I write all sorts of everything. I've done science fiction, fantasy. I've done horror. I've done poetry now, nonfiction, articles, media articles for like Sports Illustrated and Yahoo. I also volunteer a lot in the community. You probably at least heard my name spoken in several places. And I'm part of like 5 nonprofit boards and things like that, and am very involved in the writing community.
All right, Lani.
I'm Lani Forbes, and I write mostly young adult fantasy. My series, the Age of the Seventh Sun series, is through Blackstone Publishing, and book 1 came out last year. Book 2 comes out on Tuesday, which I'm really excited about. And book 3 is finished and coming out next year in February. And I'm working on another story right now for my publisher, and then I've had a couple short stories published and a few nonfiction articles. But I'm a full-time writer right now, but I'm also working on a master's degree in clinical psychology because I'm crazy.
Perfect.
All right, Mark.
Aren't we all?
Yes.
So I'm Mark Minson. I'm the author of the Phoenix Cycle series. You can find it on Amazon. I also have a short story in an anthology that was actually edited by Rowan's parents. It's paranormal, which was a bit of a jump for me. I'd never written a paranormal story before. That was fun. And currently, I'm writing stuff now. Finally, so we'll talk about this probably a little bit. But 2020 was a rough year. And so just trying to get back into writing.
All right, Rowan.
Hi, I'm Rowan North. I'm a freelance illustrator and art educator. And I mostly do mixed media and a whole bunch of like crazy ornate things. My recent thing this past year is making my own handmade watercolors, which I have just recently released a new set that's for pre-order that are all like color shifting colors. So check that out on my website. That's rowannorthillustrations.org, and I'll post that in the Shelley Room chat. But yeah, so I do a bit of everything and then some, whether it's dolls, whether it's paint, whether it's book binding. That's a new thing, and paper making. That's the thing I've been doing recently. So yeah, that's me.
All right, Troy.
And I'm Troy Lambert. I have over 24 books published. I am working on the sequel to this one right now, which I am giving away with 5 other authors this weekend. We're giving away a bunch of books. So I'll drop the link to that in the chat later. I'm the author of the Capital City Murders series. 13 of those have been published so far, and 14 and 15 are in the works. And my year was really good as far as writing is concerned. Not as good as on some other fronts, but I wrote a lot this last year. And so we'll talk about that more in the panel later on.
All right, so we were talking a little bit before we went live, and I feel like the biggest thing that we're going to want to discuss is what is your own experience with hitting a writing block and almost giving up, and what did you do? And I was telling everyone about how last year I was working really hard getting a lot of stuff done. And then I had some issues with my writing group, and it sent me spiraling. And that combined with I had to have a surgery at the end of September and that took 3 months of recovery. I didn't get any writing done for 4 months last year. And I ended up having to put that project entirely aside and start something else. And it was like the hardest decision I've ever made. But I know that it was for the best, because I will come back to it and it will be all the better for it. So does anyone else have any experiences?
Oh my goodness.
Well, so
A zillion.
yeah. So last year, so I've had a couple. When I finished my first series, I was done. Man, it was rough. I really pushed to get my books out, the last one out at any rate, and it burned me, just burned me out. So I took a couple of, I lied. I took like 6 months off. And it took me that long to decompress, and just before I could come back, and before the voices in my head started talking to me again. But once they did, it was great, and I was able to write again. Last year, my wife got 3 surgeries, so including open in May. That was the first. That was the catalyst. So last year was not awesome for writing, and to boot, this novel I was working on is called Severed, and I had hit a wall. I knew this is my first. I'm not a pantser or an outliner. It all just depends on what I'm working on. So I kind of had an idea of where I wanted the story to go, but I didn't. I'd hit this point where I was just like, I had no idea how to get to the next piece, and so it took a while, and I just kind of let my subconscious work on it. And it turned out the reason I hit a wall is that my POV needed to change. And as soon as I decided to start writing from the point of view of actually the antagonist at this point in the story, everything opened up again for me. So that, I mean, just lots of different, I have to say, if there's anything, getting through the wall, there is no one thing that's going to work for everybody. And sometimes it's just a matter of messing around with crap until you find out what works for you.
Mark said that. Yeah, I love the way that Mark put that. Yeah, just needing to shift or switch. I've been really fortunate. I've never had like real writing blocks. There's been times where I've taken breaks from projects to work on other projects or shift to things. But I'm a really diversified kind of guy. So like I'll lose interest in something and then I'll just move to another project and write on that where I have interest, and then I'll just shift to another. So I've been really fortunate in that area, but I always recommend, of course, diversifying your portfolio. Give yourself a lot of different projects you can work on to get yourself back into hearing the voices. And by the way, Mark, I am the voices in your head. I just meant
I knew they sounded familiar.
The voice in all of our heads.
That voice. Yeah, I'm like Jared in that I don't usually get writer's block because I also don't believe in writer's block in some ways, because I believe that if you're going to do this for a living, like I do, and you depend upon it for money, that if a waiter gets waiter's block, you get it often enough, you get sent home and you don't make any money. And the doctor can't show up for surgery, go, well, sorry, I have surgeon's block. Sorry about your gallbladder. No, they can't do that. So you as a writer, if you're going to write for a living, you can't not show up, but you can shift gears. But my last major writer's block was probably about 12 years ago. And part of the reason was that it happened was because I needed to learn that my words were worth money and that they were valuable and that somebody valued them other than me. And how that switched for me was I got a freelance gig writing contracts for the federal government. And the federal government pays handsomely for words. And so it was fantastic. Now, I won't let you can read those reports if you want. I'll send them to you. They are not entertaining. I'd rather you read my fiction, really. But if you really have a desire to read mindsight, historical mindsight characterization reports, I'm happy to share those. But what it taught me was that my words were worth money, and it allowed me to move into valuing my fiction and working on my fiction more. And that broke it for me. That was like a dam breaking in me that said, okay, you have all these stories to tell, but the very first set of stories I needed to tell was the first trilogy that I wrote. And that was the first thing I needed. I was the only person that could tell that story, and I needed to tell that story. And I had to get that done before I could really work on anything else.
I think.
If you,
I think. Oh,
oh, I'm so sorry.
Go for it.
But one of the things I think is important is that what works for Troy doesn't necessarily work for everyone. I'd say once again, with Troy, like I said in chat, you're very lucky that that you're able to work like that. For me, I have a whole bunch of mental health problems that make that difficult. I found out this past year that I have ADHD, which explains so much, and I haven't quite equipped those skills to kind of work with that, especially since it got so much worse this past year, just because of being in a crisis. My ADHD was just like through the roof, to the point that I actually knew, okay, something's wrong, aside from my normal depression and anxiety, and realizing that no, they're all feeding into each other. For me, blocks can be mental health related. In fact, my friend Raven says that a normal person, she believes, wants to do something. They want to do something with their life. They don't want to just sit there and be lazy. There is something mentally or even physically blocking them from doing those things, because we want to be creative people. We want to make these things. And for me, like, my mental blocks are, literal monsters in the back of my head. And I'm also a victim of mental abuse, and not physical abuse, thank God, but lots of abuse, and a lot of things that broke me down to the point that I lost sight of myself and sight of the things that I held dear, and I had to find myself again. And it just kind of kept going, where I went from one abusive situation to another, to a professor that nearly, took everything away from me, where I didn't want to. I would have existential crisis looking in the mirror, like, there's so many different artists, like, what do I even have to offer? And those are hard things and hard situations. And I have to say, the first thing to do is make sure that you are in a healthy place to create. And that, I think, is the first step for me. The first step to getting out of my blocks is cleaning my art room and getting my studio back.
Yeah. Well, I would say, listen, I love you, and I love that you said that, because part of this is, my last block was 10 years ago, but I'm 52. So, in my 20s and 30s, there were many, many, many starts and stops and struggles that I don't have now. And that's something I call, my doctor calls it that my body is experienced. And it just means I'm old, basically. But there's a lot of writers that come into their own, and artists that come into their own in their 40s and stuff like that, simply because we have some life experience behind us. And frankly, at that point, 12 years ago, I was fed up. I had gone through every career and job that you could imagine. I tell people I had an extensive collection of hairnets and name tags and careers, and none of them satisfied me. And in every one of them, if they weren't creative enough in and of themselves, I would create things in them. And they'd say, that creative thing you did last Friday, please don't come back. Here's your final check. We don't want you to do that in front of our customers. Okay, well, somebody's picky. But, so understand that when I say that, I am very lucky in doing what I love. And I am very lucky in that the last dozen years, I've been able to do exactly what I wanted to do. And I've broken through, and I was able to write that first trilogy of novels. But that did not come like that. There's no overnight success, if you want to put it that way. The overnight success that I had was that I took a short story I'd been working on for 20 years and turned it into a novel. That's overnight success.
Yeah, and I think we had another panel on this a little bit earlier talking about how mental health can be a block to creativity. And I know that was a huge issue for me, especially when all this COVID stuff kind of started happening. And all of a sudden, I had my 2 young children at home, and I had a deadline where I had to get my next manuscript to my publisher in March. And I was like, and plus just the stress and chaos and everything. I just, mentally and emotionally with my own mental health struggles, I was so stuck. And I'm like, I have to get this manuscript to my editor in a month. I have no idea how this is going to happen. And, but I like how Rowan pointed out that like, it is going to be different for each person. And like certain things that work for some people aren't going to work for others. And I know for me, the biggest help is social connection. If I'm feeling isolated, I tend to like kind of spiral into my mental health stuff. And so for me, I love staying involved in the writing community. Up here in Idaho, I'm part of the Idaho Writers Guild. I'm part of Romance Writers of America. I have a critique group through SCBWI. And even just other authors I've met through LTUE. The only reason I got my manuscript finished and turned in to my publisher on time, I'm convinced, is because I had a friend that I had met at LTUE last year. And I was kind of talking to her about what was going on. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't know how I'm going to get this done. And she goes, you know what we're going to do is you're going to get on Skype with me every single day for the next 3 weeks. And we're going to Skype from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. or however long it takes. And I am just going to sit here and I will work on my stuff. You will work on your stuff. And we are just going to hold each other accountable. And I was just, I don't want to do it. And there were days where I'd literally sign on and I'd be like, I have nothing in me. And she's like, I don't care, right? And just having that accountability. And it would take everything in me to just start. But then once I started, I was able to keep going. And I'm dedicating my 3rd book to her because I'm quite convinced that that manuscript would not exist without her. But having social support and being able to lean on, whatever resources you have, other writers, family, friends, I think when we isolate, it makes overcoming those roadblocks so much harder.
I love that you said that. That's one of the things a lot of people ask, how I could be on like 5 nonprofit boards and work like 4 jobs and have 5 kids, one of which was on the heart transplant list for 3 years. He just barely got his new heart, knock on wood. Yeah. Yeah, that was exciting. But, one of those things is exactly what you were saying. The support group is really super helpful. And that's not easy for everybody to get support groups, right? Some people are like those introverts that it's really hard to go to, right? To go to a writer's meeting. The very first time I went to a League of Utah writers meeting, I was in the very back corner of the room. I knew nobody. I wanted to talk to nobody. I didn't want to have anything right? I'm like, oh, I thought to myself, how do I build a support group out of people I don't want to talk to? So I get it. It's hard. But when you do build that support group and you communicate with them, communicate with your friends and your family, let them know what goals or what trials you're going through, then they could be there to help try to take some of that weight off your shoulders. Now, they obviously can't do everything for you, and everybody, like you said, have different challenges, but it's definitely going to help if you have that support group. They'll help lift you through some really tough or difficult or dark times or into situations that you never thought you were capable of.
I'm sorry to jump in, but really fast. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I think also generationally, the way that we were taught and the way that we were learned, also feeds into how we interact with other people and how we get our energy. So I listened to a lot of podcasts, especially about like mental health and psychology. Funny that. Also about serial killers, but that's a subject for another time.
Yes. My people.
Serial killers and true crime and cults. Yes, those are my interests. But one of the things they pointed out is that for Gen X, you guys make decisions a lot on your own and probably do a lot of powering on your own. You internalize a lot more than millennials, which we were the group teach generation, where we were raised teaching as a group or learning as a group. And that's why we rely so much more on others and coming to decisions together. Meanwhile, Gen Z was the internet generation. They need that information fast and that inspiration fast. And that makes for interesting challenges. And that means they take things quite literally when they're flung at them at the internet or in writing. So very, very interesting. Just remember that the way you were raised, where you were raised, what era you were born actually could affect how your work style is.
Yeah. I was one of those that didn't ever believe in writer's block forever too. Just because whenever I had even the smallest block, I knew that it was something wrong with my manuscript. I just had to go back a couple pages and find the mistake that I'd made, that my subconscious was saying, you need to fix this before you move on or it will become a problem later. And so I would just go back a couple pages, dig through my manuscript and be like, oh yeah, I made this character do something that's outside of his personality, or I did this, or I took this plot line and it's not going to work out. And so I would make that fix and then I could write again. But then a couple of years ago, I finished writing, I was ghostwriting. So I finished writing 2 books for someone else and one of my own books in about a 6-month period. And I depleted every ounce of energy that I had and I did not get it back. And so for the last couple of years, I have been struggling to do anything. And I feel like I'm just barely coming out of that now, where I can start creating art again and I'm writing again. I am, of course, working on 3 different projects at once again because
Because why not?
That's a move.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
I usually find about 3 projects works well for me because I can bounce back and forth. Where if I'm like, nah, this one doesn't feel like I want to deal with it today, I can work on one of the other ones. But for a while there, I just couldn't touch anything. I did not have the energy inside to do it, and I had to do some digging and focus on myself and deal with some stress and do some pruning to my life where I could get to a point where I had the energy again to start writing and creating again.
I totally get that. One of the things that I do when I get to that place where I don't have the energy and I'm stressed and I actually go out and kill people. I'm a mass murderer. No, I play Call of Duty, so I do go out and kill people. I do take my stresses out on other people in a, I don't know if you'd call it a healthy way, but another way.
It's good to have a healthy outlet. Yeah.
Alternative way.
An alternative way. Yeah. I mean, we're all
Yes.
writers, so as we know, we're all mass murderers or serial killers. But yeah,
Chat is literally joking about that right now.
Yeah, right? Exactly. You got it. But it's the sometimes I do. Sometimes I just have to do something completely different. That's actually one of the reasons why I started going heavier into Twitch, right? Playing NCAA 14 football, right? This is my team, actually. That's a Georgia State. Or, shooting people on Call of Duty, getting to hang out with other people. And I found it was really odd because doing those things, when I'd come back to my writing project, I'd have more energy all of a sudden. Now, like I said, that doesn't work for everybody, like we talked about. But, it's healthy. Go out there. Maybe if you're stressed, go out and kill some people on video games and not in real life. And then maybe you'll get overcome something.
Yeah. I think though too, think about this, is that part of not giving up is knowing yourself well enough to take a break. Because I've been like where you were, Charlie, where you're like burnt out. And at some point you have to realize before you so completely burn out that you're just done, you have to back off. I mean, I remember a time I was working doing a couple government contracts still. I was writing a novel that was under deadline. I was doing all that kind of stuff. And I had this side gig going on that was great. This videography thing that was freelance and it was fun. And in 1 week, I clocked over 80 hours on my computer, plus what I worked off the computer. And it was insane. And when I got done with that, I just literally had to take a few weeks where I did absolutely zero because I couldn't do anything because there was nothing in the tank. And then you have to figure out, like Jared was saying, what refills your tank? I mean, part of not giving up is understanding yourself well enough to take care of yourself to the point where you say, okay, I'm not going to pull an all-nighter working on this novel because I know that what I write tomorrow will be better than what I'm writing tonight. Even though it feels like I'm accomplishing something, that's not what this is about. So I think, kind of going back to our topic of not giving up, one of the things about not giving up doesn't mean that you don't take a break. It doesn't mean that you don't experience story another way. And it doesn't mean, like Allie, that you don't walk away from one of your critique groups. You know what I mean? Because sometimes that is a huge harm, is that social community is really important, but the right social community is really important. If you're in the wrong one, kick them out. Because God bless you, Allie. I really do want to I'm telling you, because the don't give up
I'm doing much
thing,
better now.
Yeah, you need Lani, Skype friend.
I finished just in January. I started and finished the first draft of a novella, and I outlined 3 sequels, and I'm working on the second one right now. So I just had to put it aside, and this was an idea that I have been sitting on for probably 6 years, and it's finally getting written now because I pushed this other project to the side, and I'll get back to it. And I know that I'll get back to it. Sometimes we just have to give ourselves permission to suck and to write poorly.
Hard,
and that was writing. It is hard. And I finally hit that point where I was like, okay, this is not working. And I went to this writers group, and they would not give me permission to suck. And they focused so much on the negative that that was all I could think about with that story. And now I'm getting to a point to where I'm like, okay, I'll be able to make changes. I think I know where I need to make changes. And a lot of it turned back to my other writing group, where I have an accountability partner who I have to Snapchat him my word count every single day to, so that he knows that I'm getting work at. It's really fun. And I had to go back to them and literally just in tears, and they just showered me with praise and were like, oh, you're so amazing, you could do anything, blah, 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 so I felt good enough again to let myself suck. It's a first draft. It's okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
no, go ahead.
What were you going to say? Well, I was going to change the subject.
I was going to try to bring back to the book that only you can write, because that's probably one of the things that people often don't realize is sometimes the first thing you write, and you may not ever even publish it or shop it around or whatever, is the book that's inside you that just needs to get out. Everything else you write after that book will be much, much better. And I know this from personal experience. The first novel I wrote was something there's a lot of autobiographical and just stuff in there that I needed to write. And once I wrote it, again, that was just part of what broke that dam inside me. That between that and seeing that my words had value, those two things were the biggest key for me. So I think, if we talk about writing the book that only you can write, part of that is knowing that you have that inside you and being okay with getting it out, regardless of whether you do anything with it beyond that, getting it out.
Oh yeah. I mean, you have experiences that nobody else has had, right? Your life is never the same as anybody else's. And so my youngest 2 kids are twins. And they're mirror twins. So the only way you can really tell is one's left-handed, one's right-handed. You have to throw them a ball, and they part their hair on different sides. But otherwise, they're practically identical to look at them, right? But man, one of them plays the trumpet amazingly. He picked it up and just loved it, and has just really excelled at that. And my other twin likes to sing, right? So even though their life experiences, and I know, have been very similar up to that point, they are still very different people. And they still have seen the world in their own way. And that is the same with every single one of everybody watching this panel, every one of us, right? My first book really did suck. And that's why it's the 8th edition that's out right now. Because the first time I wrote it was crap. But I loved the story so much, and that it was worth to me making those 8 editions. Finally got it to an actual editor, and that's why the last edition, that's why what's out there right now is all that's ever going to be out there, because I'm done. But yeah, it's that you are the one that can write that story, and it may suck the very first time, and it may not be a story anybody reads, but once you have it out there, once you kind of free yourself from that internal story, the story of you, however you present that, mine's in a magical world, and they have magic, but the kid is still a nerd. He still has the nerd at work sign on his door like I did when I was a teenager. And, but once it's out there, you find your light, you can just open up, and there's so much more experience that you can create and generate. And that's where all of the other books that you're ever going to write are going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Me, I guess I'll go before we begin this polite standstill. So actually, James C. Christensen has a quote that's that he uses time and time again about our card catalogs, and basically that when we start life, we have a whole bunch of blank cards, and then throughout life, we fill it with everything we see, everything we experience, everything we learn. Whether that's movies, books, classes you take, Defendi always says that if you want to make a creative book, don't take creative writing because it teaches you the formula and not how to do it well. If you want to do creative writing, then take medical science or something. So we all have our card catalogs and our experiences. So my experience with depression and abuse and things like that informs me and our cards in my catalog that no one else has, and that only I can use. So you are absolutely on the dot there, Mark.
What I was going to add to that, and I love what you put on there, Ron. So I was fortunate. I actually drove Lyft for 2 years, had just about 2,000 rides completed, so 2,000 different passengers, and I loved the conversation. Now, I mentioned earlier that I was like an extreme introvert when I started 7 years ago. I'm a little bit, as you could tell, not as introverted, but as I would write, I would talk to these individuals, and they'd have these amazing stories, and I'd always say, "Man, you've got to write that down." And they're like, "Nobody wants to read what I'm writing." I'm like, "You have no idea. Everybody wants to read what you're writing," and I'm going to be honest, it's true about what you're writing right now. Even if you're just journaling, don't get me wrong. I don't want to read everybody's journal. I am curious about Troy's though. But the key there is to get it out, like they were saying, write it. But one of the other things I always love, there it is. Get my hands on that. No, so one of the things would be sometimes in order to get a good picture for yourself of your experiences, or sometimes to do something that's a little bit uncomfortable. Lyft actually was super uncomfortable for me. But you do something a little bit outside your comfort zone, and all of a sudden you'll get a glimpse back at what your experience is, and that will really help write your story, or really, or even if you just start journaling, I'm going to be honest, super helpful.
I do want to turn the time over to questions now. So producer, do we have any questions?
Those should be interesting. They've been going off about cow vampires and stuff while we've been talking.
Our chat has been hilarious.
And murder.
So cow vampires, are they into milk or blood? I just want to clarify
Right.
that one thing before we start.
They turn blood into milk.
Ooh, blood
Okay,
milk.
that's alchemy.
Magic.
It's like, no,
And I can totally
no.
see how that relates to what we've been talking about.
Exactly.
I don't know. Do vampires drink breast milk? I don't think so. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No.
For
Anyway.
reference on that, you can read the book Bunnicula about a bunny vampire.
Yeah.
Oh,
Anyways,
Yep.
we do have a few questions. First question is, when does the hardest part of writing a book come?
That
Yeah,
always
When you're a
depends on the
stay-at-home
book.
mom with a kid.
yeah, that's different for everybody. There's no
Yeah.
easy answer. And that's what we were all going to say at the same time, right?
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
having a kid who's on the heart transplant, having somebody go
Oh,
through
yeah.
surgery, having somebody, forced to stay at home with 2 young kids and do school, having
Having-
Yeah.
it's going to be different for everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, the answer is all of it. Honestly, I always tell people that the novel process works exactly the same way for me every time. I start it because I think this is the greatest idea I've ever had in my life. This is fantastic. This is an absolutely wonderful book. You get halfway through and you're like, I'm a hack. Everybody's going to read this and they're going to determine that I don't know how to write. I should just delete everything on my hard drive and go work at Walmart as a greeter. Hey, little boy, here's your sticker. And then you get to the end of it and you're like, this is the greatest book I've ever written. This is going to be the life changer. This is fantastic. And then you send it to your editor and you get it back and you're like, I'm a hack. I should delete. And then because that process was so great, when you're through with that, you start another book.
Yep.
And people are like, doesn't that ever change? I'm like, no, 20
Nope.
books in, and the process is exactly the same. It's absolutely torturous and I love it and wouldn't trade it for anything. But yeah, so all of it is hard. Every single time, all of it is hard. And I love it so much that I would do all these hard things over and over again and actually do it for a living. I hope that helps.
And I have to give myself permission to have those days where I'm like, I just am horrible and I should never be an author. And what the heck was I thinking? And if I have one of those days, I'll give myself today and be like, yep, today I want to give up. And then tomorrow I get right back on because I can't give up. And no matter how much I want to, sometimes I literally can't.
Yeah, I can't.
But yeah, give yourself permission to have those days where you're just like, okay, today's one of those days where I just suck.
Yeah. And it's such a lonely profession. Like we really are just sitting by ourselves in front of the screen, just talking to ourselves. And partway through that, you start to feel very lonely and sad and isolated. And you forget that there are other people. I need a Skype friend who will sit with me and write with me.
Yep.
Yeah. I tell you, my first book, the only reason I got through it was my daughter, who is a voracious reader, and she wanted to read it. She was always so excited whenever I add more stuff to it, and that really helped, even if it was crap. And she was just excited to read it. And I tell you, once I got my books out there, the first one out there, and the first time somebody came back and said, I can't wait for book 2. Like that was it for me, right? That was my moment of, holy crap, maybe I can do this. Somebody liked something I wrote, and they're not a relative. So that's that right there is a good sign, right? When they came back and they were just like, hey, yeah, we are so excited. When's book 2 coming out? And I'm like, I just got book 1. I haven't even started on book 2. I don't know. And I didn't have an editor because it's self-published, so I didn't have any deadlines. So that was kind of nice too. But but no, it was a great experience, and that for me also helped, knowing that people liked it. And granted, I have not sold a ton, but I've not had a lot of negative feedback either. That were like, people are like, oh my gosh, this really sucks, right? And so for me, that was a huge thing for helping me break through that. Am I a hack? Not having my daughter read it and just be like, ooh, I love this part, or and that feedback. That's a writer's group, a good writer's group. Let me clarify that for you, Allie. Can be so amazing if they do it right. Then they're going to give you good feedback and help you believe that you can do this.
For your answers. Our next question is from SLC Highboy. When did you realize that you had a story to tell?
Oh, easy. 14. I remember the moment
I was
when
12.
I was 14. I remember the moment when I was 14 years old, and I decided that I wanted to be a writer when I grew up. Unfortunately, the reason I didn't start writing full time until much later was basically because tons of experts and counselors and said, "Oh, you're actually a really good writer. That's really cute, but how are you going to make money?" And I explored for over 2 decades many other ways to make money, that none of them worked for me until I learned to do this full time. So I can point to that moment. I knew when I wrote my first book when I was 6 years old, called George and the Giant Castle. It's never going to be published, but I am the book that I feel like I need to write that's next is Troy and the Giant Castle, and it's my story. It's my story that said, how did I get out of this hole of everybody telling me I couldn't do something to being actually able to do it. So I knew what story was in me, and I knew what I needed to write when I was 14 years old. I wrote the novel that I really needed to write just before I turned 40.
I think I had the same counselors as Troy. I know we grew up in different places, but I think they must have moved because that was exactly the same story. Like I grew up, and it was the 4th grade when I started writing with passion, and all my teachers would do the same thing. What a great, gifted student you are at writing. You should now to look into more serious things about how you're gonna do things in life. But it's funny because I'm going to be honest. My first, I had written many books, many passion projects, but the first book that got published for me, it wasn't like I knew that book was coming. It was, I stayed up late one night watching the History Channel, as one should if they want to get new ideas. And I came across something. I'm like, it was the most interesting fact. I'm like, what? This is true? Like, nobody knows this fact. I'm like, I've got to write a book around this fact because it's on the History Channel, so people know it. But when I ask people about it, they're like, that's not a real thing. I'm like, it is a real thing. So then I wrote a book around it, so you never know what's going to spark the real inspiration for your next big story. But, we've been passionate about writing for probably forever.
For sure.
If you don't mind, kind of taking this from a angle, artist angle, as an artist, we get ideas actually very similarly to writers from, especially what you were describing, Jared. The idea of we discover something new or something that's inspiring, we get ideas from multiple places, and we put it together in interesting ways. The thing that's been super interesting to me lately is moths. They are literally nature's mimics. And I don't know, everyone look up the hummingbird moth. That literally is a straight up mimic. You can't convince me otherwise because it flies like a hummingbird. It looks like a hummingbird. The only way you can tell it's a butterfly is it's got the little swirly, like,
proboscis,
and then its little antenna. So, but it even like moves its wings in the same way. But there is a moth that looks like a spider. Literally, there's a moth that has tentacles that come out of its butt. I wish I was kidding. Those are actually its like scent glands or whatever, but it looks like something out of Lovecraft. There are a few species of moths that look like bees, and I'm thinking of all these ideas. I'm actually working with another artist now to make stationery based on moths, so I'm really excited about that. But I feel like that's a whole thing is I kind of went through this rabbit hole of learning things, and I want to share my discoveries with other people. And that's what art is about.
For me, one of my favorite
someone in the audience is now going to write a moth story.
Oh yeah, probably. I was going to say one of my favorite quotes of all time is it says, if you can quit writing, then quit. And if you can't, you're a writer. And for me, I can always tell the story that I'm meant to tell because it won't leave me alone. Like, even when I'm like, no, I will not write this. I'm giving up on it. I'll be like I'll literally be like drying my hair after a shower and the story is just going in my head. And I'm like, gosh, dang it, leave me alone. So for me, it's always a matter of, I can't not write the story because it will drive me insane.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say the story that I haven't touched in 6 months. The characters are still here bugging me, which is how I know I will come back to it and eventually tell their story. maybe I'm just not ready yet. Maybe I need to grow a little more as a writer.
We won't talk about my new work folder that's on my computer that is just this list of like first chapters and story ideas that are totally unrelated to each other, that just out of the blue, they just hit me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I love that. And so I start writing and the story just kind of starts going, and then something inevitably interrupts me, or I decide that I need to write something else because some other idea has hit me. But I keep them all because at some point I want to come back and I want to write those stories. Inspiration strikes at the weirdest places.
I have about 30 started as well that I would love to get back to. I have sometimes it's just a paragraph, sometimes it's a whole chapter that I've started that they're great ideas, but I need to finish the ones that I've started now before I can get to them.
Going off that point, I said this in my last panel. My husband gave a presentation this morning. I was talking about right brain versus left brain, how that's a myth, creativity. And he showed this clip of a video of a psychologist talking, and it was talking about the different stages of creativity. And one of the things they talked about was how vital the incubation stage is for creating. That you come up with these ideas and then you let them just sit. And they just sit in the back of your mind doing whatever they do. And then when you get to come back to them, they'll be that much better for it. And I'm a strong advocate for that idea because, like everyone was saying, you have chapter starts and, little tiny paragraphs. I literally have a file of character sheets that I'm like, one day I will find the story to fit these characters. And they're just sitting there waiting, and they're incubating, and eventually I'll get to them. We are running low on time, so I want everyone to give any last minute advice where people can find you outside of LTUE.
I'll start with next. I have a panel, a presentation at 6 o'clock and at 7 o'clock. It's 2 hours. It's split into two-part called Perfect Series Plotting to Prevent Stalls and Burnout. And we actually talk about the difference between big ideas and small ideas. So you can listen to those recorded presentations. I'll be there after each one to answer questions for you. And then I have more stuff tomorrow. If you want to talk with me more, I have a creator chat tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock.
Rowan?
I am Rowan North. I'm a freelance illustrator and art educator. And I have one more panel today and then one more tomorrow. Actually, mine is like right after this, and it is in Gary Gygax's Creating Game Settings, where I talk more about my experience as a GM and, being able to make really compelling settings. Yes, aside from that, you can find my work at rowannorthillustrations.org or find my link tree, linktr.ee/Rowan North, no space, for social media and things like that. So thank you.
Mark?
All right. So as I said before, you can find my trilogy on Amazon as well as Haunted Yuletide, which is the anthology with my short story. If you're into gaming, since Rowan brought it up, I also have some content I've created for the Pathfinder RPG. You find it under Elf Cabbage Creations. Just Cabbage. I'm pretty much the only one associated with that. So it's kind of a unique moniker to me, but you can find me there. And I don't have any more panels because tomorrow is our celebration of Valentine's, and my wife and I take that very seriously. So it kills me that LTUE is almost always on Valentine's Day weekend, because Valentine's Day is like an off-limits holiday for me. My hopeless romantic will not allow me to forget that or neglect it. So,
Aww.
Lani?
Yeah, you can find me on my website, just LaniForbes.com, which is one of the benefits of having a weird first name. Is I have a pretty simple website. It's just LaniForbes.com. All my social media links are there, and you can actually send me messages through the website too. But definitely, please check out my book too. The Jade Bones comes out this Tuesday, so I'm really excited about that.
It's fantastic. It's really good.
Thank you, Troy.
Jared?
Awesome. You can find me at jaredquan.com. I'm on, of course, LinkedIn, Facebook. Love to link up, even if it's just to talk about writing or murder, or if you figured out how to get Troy's journal. We'll put a bounty on that. We'll see if we can acquire that. Yeah, I'd love to chat anytime.
Mission impossible for his journal.
Dun, 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 dun.
Charlie?
I'm Charlie Pulsipher. You can find me online. I'm on Amazon. My books are there in print, ebook, and audiobook. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook if you want to see more of these. They're pretty cool. And never give up. Never surrender.
Never
Keep
surrender.
writing.
What to say?
Keep writing your books. I believe that a book finds you for a reason. I think you're the best person to tell that story at that time. So if it comes to you, write it.
And remember, at least you're not a cow.
Yeah.
Or
Vampiric
vampire
cow.
cow.
Vampire.
I'm Allie May. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Allie May Author. It's the same. That's also my web address, alliemayauthor.com. Feel free to reach out to me anywhere if you have any more questions. I will try to jump into the chat to see if I can answer anything before the next panel. But thank you everyone for coming, and I think we're done.
Thank you so much to our
Thanks.
panelists.
Thanks for coming.